The briefing tent at Forward Operating Base Constant smelled of coffee and dust. 12 men sat on folding chairs and crates, their faces lit by the pale glow of a laptop screen showing satellite images of a compound 40 miles to the north. They were Widow 6, a Navy SEAL element known across the base for finishing what they started. Tonight, for the first time in months, they were not sure they could. Commander Ray Holt stood at the front of the tent, arms crossed, staring at the map as if it might rearrange itself into something easier. The mission was simple in theory. A mid-level insurgent financier, a man responsible for funding at least 3 planned attacks on coalition forces, was staying one night only, in a compound at the edge of a valley. Widow 6 had until sunrise to get in, extract him alive, and get out. After that, he would vanish into the mountains, and with him, the intelligence that could save dozens of lives. The problem was elevation. The compound sat in a bowl of hills, with a single ridge offering any kind of overwatch. Without a sniper on that ridge, the extraction team would be moving through the valley with no eyes above them and no way to stop trouble before it started. Their sniper, a quiet Texan named Danny Reyes, had been pulled from the mission 12 hours earlier after his appendix decided to rupture at the worst possible time. The replacement sniper promised by command had not arrived, and now, with less than 18 hours until the operation, it did not look like he would. "We go in blind on elevation," Holt said, his voice flat, "or we scrub the mission." Nobody liked either option. Scrubbing meant the financier walked free, along with whatever information he carried. Going in blind meant 12 men in a valley with no one watching their backs from above. Holt looked around the tent, hoping someone would offer a third option. Nobody did. Then, from the back of the tent, near the flap where the night air slipped in cold and dry, a voice spoke up. It was calm, almost soft, and it did not belong to a SEAL. "I used to shoot competitively," the voice said, "before flight school. Long-range precision. 3 years running." Every head turned. Standing near the entrance was Chief Warrant Officer Mara Ellison, the base's helicopter pilot. She had flown logistics runs and medevac missions for 8 months, ferrying supplies and wounded soldiers in and out of hot zones with a steadiness that had earned her quiet respect but little attention. She was not someone anyone expected to speak up in a room full of special operators, and she was certainly not someone anyone expected to offer to shoot. She let the silence sit for a moment, then added, "Where should I aim today?" A few of the men exchanged glances. One of the younger operators, a broad-shouldered lieutenant named Cole, let out a short laugh before catching himself, unsure if she was joking. Holt did not laugh. He had learned a long time ago that people who joked about that kind of thing usually did not offer it in the first place. He studied her for a moment, the way he might study an unfamiliar weapon before deciding whether to trust it. "You're serious," he said. "I am," Ellison replied. Holt turned to his second-in-command, a master chief named Diaz, and nodded toward the laptop. "Pull her file." It took less than 5 minutes. What came up surprised everyone in the tent, except Ellison herself. Long before she had ever sat behind the controls of a helicopter, Mara Ellison had been a nationally ranked long-range shooter, competing through her early 20s in precision rifle events across the country. She had come within a fraction of a point of qualifying for Olympic trials before an injury to her shoulder ended that chapter of her life. She had turned to aviation instead, chasing a different kind of precision, one that required steady hands and a calm mind under pressure. Buried in her service record, almost as an afterthought, were her range qualification scores from flight school. They were, as Diaz put it quietly, better than some of the snipers he had served with. Holt closed the laptop and looked at her again, longer this time. He thought about the men he would be sending into that valley in less than 18 hours, about the financier who would slip away if they waited any longer, about the ridge that needed eyes on it, and the sniper who was not coming. "You understand what I'm asking," he said. "This isn't flying supplies. If you're up there, you're the only thing standing between my team and whatever comes out of that compound." "I understand," Ellison said. Her voice did not waver. "I've spent 8 months flying men like yours in and out of places like this. I know what's at stake. I'm not asking you to trust me because I'm confident. I'm asking you to trust me because I'm capable, and right now, Capable is what you need. There was something in the way she said it, plain and unhurried, that settled the room more than any speech could have. Holt looked at Diaz. Diaz gave a small nod. It was not protocol. It was not the way things were supposed to work. But out here, far from the neat rules of a training manual, decisions were sometimes made on instinct and necessity rather than paperwork. "All right," Holt said. "You're on the ridge." The rest of the day moved quickly. Ellison spent the afternoon with the base's remaining sniper equipment, checking the rifle that would have gone to Reyes, familiarizing herself with its weight and balance, its scope and its quirks. She worked alongside Diaz, who had some sniper training himself, running through wind calculations and range estimates for the terrain they would be operating in. She did not ask for reassurance, and she did not offer any either. She simply worked, methodically, the same way she approached every pre-flight check before a mission. Word spread quickly around the small base, as it always does in tight quarters. By evening, more than a few soldiers found reasons to walk past the equipment tent, curious to see the pilot who had volunteered to become a sniper overnight. Some were skeptical. A young corporal named Briggs, who had flown with her twice on medevac runs, was not one of them. "She got me and 3 wounded guys out of a valley that was still taking fire," he told anyone who would listen. "She didn't blink once. If she says she can shoot, she can shoot." As night fell, Widow 6 prepared to move out. Ellison joined them at the staging point, dressed not in her flight suit, but in a ghillie covering borrowed from the sniper's kit, her face streaked with camouflage paint applied by Diaz's steady hand. She looked different out of the cockpit, smaller somehow, and yet there was nothing uncertain in the way she checked her gear one final time. Holt approached her before they split into their separate elements, his team heading toward the valley floor, Ellison and a spotter named Petty Officer Sanchez climbing toward the ridge. "Last chance," Holt said quietly, not because he doubted her, but because it was his job to ask. "You sure about this?" Ellison looked past him, toward the dark shape of the ridge rising against the night sky. "I've spent 8 months flying your team home," she said. "Tonight, I'm just doing it from a different seat." Holt nodded once, and the 2 elements moved out into the darkness. The climb to the ridge took nearly 2 hours, slow and careful, every step placed with deliberate quiet. Sanchez led the way, and Ellison followed, the weight of the rifle settling into a rhythm against her back that felt strangely familiar, like a memory her body had never quite forgotten. When they reached the position, a shallow depression among the rocks that offered a clear view of the compound below, they settled in and began the long wait. Through the scope, the valley spread out like a held breath. The compound sat quiet, a scatter of low buildings around a central courtyard, a single light burning in one window. Widow 6 moved into position along the tree line at the valley's edge, 12 shapes barely visible even to Ellison's trained eye. She adjusted her breathing, slow and even, the way she had trained herself to do more than a decade ago on a different kind of range, aiming at paper targets instead of watching over the lives of men she had only just met. For hours, nothing happened. This was the part no one talked about when they described missions like this one, the long stretch of stillness where the only sound was wind moving through dry grass and the occasional soft crackle of the radio. Ellison kept her eye to the scope, calling range and wind estimates to Sanchez in a low, steady voice, the 2 of them building a quiet rhythm of trust in the darkness. Just after 2 in the morning, the radio crackled with Holt's voice, tight and controlled. Widow 6 was moving in. Ellison watched through the scope as the 12 shapes below broke from the tree line and began their approach toward the compound, moving in practiced, overlapping formation. Her finger rested lightly along the trigger guard, not yet on the trigger itself, her eye tracking every shadow and movement across the compound's walls. The extraction went smoothly at first. 2 operators peeled away to secure the perimeter, while the rest moved toward the building where their target was reported to be sleeping. Ellison's breathing stayed even, her focus narrowing to the small world visible through her scope. She could hear Holt's voice occasionally over the radio, calm and clipped, directing his team through the compound's narrow passages. Then, everything changed at once. A door on the compound's eastern side swung open, and 2 armed men emerged, moving quickly toward the sound of Widow 6's approach. They had not been accounted for in the earlier reconnaissance, an oversight that happens even in the most careful planning, and now they were moving into a position that would put them directly behind Holt's team. "Contact, east side," Sanchez said quietly, but Ellison had already seen them. Her mind moved fast, running through the geometry of the situation the way she had once calculated windage and distance for competition targets. Except now the stakes were measured in lives rather than points. The two men were closing quickly, and Holt's team, focused on their objective inside the compound, had not yet seen them. "Widow 6, contact east, 2 hostiles, closing your position," Ellison said into the radio, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. Holt's response came fast. "Copy, can you engage?" Ellison adjusted her aim, calculating the distance, the wind, the slight downward angle from the ridge. 1,600 meters, give or take. It was farther than anything she had shot in competition, farther than anything in her training that afternoon. But the fundamentals did not change with distance. Breathe, settle, wait for the pause between heartbeats. "Second window, you're 10 o'clock, engaging," she said, her voice flat and calm, the same tone she used when calling out fuel levels during a routine flight. She fired once. Through the scope, she saw the first hostile go down. The second man froze for half a second, disoriented, giving Holt's team the window they needed to see him and respond. It was over in seconds, the immediate threat neutralized before it ever reached the men moving through the compound below. "Threat down," Ellison reported. "You're clear." There was a pause on the radio, just long enough to notice, before Holt's voice returned. "Steadier now. Copy that. Good shot." The rest of the extraction unfolded without further incident. Widow 6 secured the financier and moved him out through the same tree line they had entered, while Ellison and Sanchez kept watch from the ridge until the last of the team had cleared the valley. Only then did she lower the rifle, her hands steady, but her heart finally catching up to everything that had happened, the adrenaline draining slowly into something like exhaustion. They made their way back down the ridge, as the first hint of dawn began to color the eastern sky, gray fading toward pale gold. By the time they reached the base, Widow 6 had already secured their extracted target and were beginning their debrief. Holt met Ellison at the edge of the compound, his face marked with the particular tiredness that came after a mission had gone right instead of wrong. "You saved my team tonight," he said simply. Ellison shook her head slightly. "Your team saved themselves. I just gave them a couple extra seconds." "Sometimes a couple of seconds is everything," Holt said. In the after-action report filed the following day, Holt wrote a line that would follow Ellison for years afterward, repeated quietly among soldiers who heard the story second-hand and third-hand as it traveled between bases. "We didn't have a sniper," he wrote. "We had something better. We had someone nobody thought to ask, until she asked us first." The story might have ended there, a single remarkable night tucked into the long record of an ordinary deployment. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, in the way people on the base saw Mara Ellison. She was still the quiet pilot who flew logistics and medevac runs, still someone who preferred to work steadily rather than draw attention to herself. But now, when soldiers watched her walk across the base toward her helicopter each morning, they carried with them the knowledge of what she had done on that ridge, and the reminder that the most capable people are not always the ones who announce themselves first. A few weeks later, a young private who had heard the story from Briggs found himself standing near Ellison as she completed her pre-flight checks. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since he first heard what happened that night. "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" "About the shooting, I mean." Ellison paused, running her hand along the edge of the rotor blade, checking for anything out of place before her next flight. She thought about the question for a moment, not because she did not know the answer, but because she wanted to give him an honest one. "Nobody asked," she said. She climbed into the cockpit, ran through her final checks, and lifted off into the pale morning sky, off to fly another routine mission that no one would remember until the next time someone needed exactly what she had to offer and finally thought to ask.